in a reinforced armored truck. At this point, roughly 2 minutes after the first shots rang out, he's evacuated and his motorcade then sped to a hospital where he received treatment. Swarms of additional units then make their way to the stage. As a result of the assassination attempt, one attendee was killed and 2 others were injured who are still in critical condition from the rounds that missed the president. When I watched the video of what happened last night, it filled me with a visceral reaction of disgust and anger. It made me concerned for my country. I'm praying that somehow we can find a way to emerge from this tragedy stronger than before and show that we won't let the deranged acts of one individual tear us apart. This is a satellite image of the venue where the rally was held at Butler Farms Showgrounds near Butler, Pennsylvania. It's a wide open outdoor field with ground level and rooftop visibility that extends over 100 meters in every direction. The gunman was able to somehow evade security and managed to get onto this rooftop here. It's about 420 feet or 130 meters away from the podium and stage where Trump was giving his speech. He was on a 1-story building with a pitch that's probably about 25 feet in elevation. Law enforcement reported the shooter used an AR-style rifle recovered at the scene. This suggests that it's most likely a .556 round. If that's the case, with a scope, 130 meters is an incredibly easy shot for someone who knows how to shoot. The 6 to 8 bullets appeared to miss President Trump by only a few millimeters after he turned his head slightly to the right. The gunman might have aimed for the head because it wouldn't be unheard of for a politician to wear body armor during a speech. It looks like the Secret Service counter-sniper team were using what looks to be a special version of the bolt-action Remington 700 with a suppressor firing a .300 Winchester Magnum round with a powerful variable scope. For reference, that's got substantial recoil and pinpoint accuracy out to 800 meters and beyond. To the point of what McMillan was saying earlier, this is the type of rifle that you'd be looking for extended range threats beyond 150 meters. This video posted on X of the counter-sniper team has 15 million views, with people disagreeing on whether or not the would-be assassin took the first shot or if the counter-sniper team fired first. The way I look at the security measures are that they're a tiered and layered approach. The sniper team is one of the last lines of defense. If they're pulling triggers, that means a lot of other steps have already gone wrong, because ideally a shooter should never even have gotten within a mile of an elevated clear shot of the former president. People are inevitably going to be picking apart the split-second decisions of the first responders, and I can understand why there's some value in that. But I think the more important question is, how much resources and funding were they given based on the tempo of their operations, and how big was Trump's Secret Service personnel detail? How many resources did they have available to them? How thin were they spread? In Tim McMillan's analysis, he stated, quote, "Based on limited details at this point, in my opinion, the security breakdown occurred in the middle tier, which would likely include law enforcement who were supposed to be assigned to the area near the outbuildings. History was at a fork in the road here that was determined by less than an inch in a fraction of a second. This building that the gunman took up a firing position on is not a part of the Butler Farm Show perimeter. It lies just outside and belongs to a different company called AGR International. They're a supplier of automation equipment for glass and plastic packaging, but that could be one potential reason as to why this happened, because it was outside the perimeter of the event. But beyond a few trees, there's nothing between the president, just a wide open field that separates the two. The Secret Service advance team would have created a plan weeks in advance that normally would have identified every single elevated potential sniper position within line of sight. A quick count shows there are about 18 buildings that have a clear line of sight that I've marked for you on the map. Agents would normally either have someone posted up on each location, or they would strictly control access to all these buildings on the ground days in advance. I actually have some idea of how these operations work, because over 10 years ago in 2015, President Obama visited a place that I was working at. The Secret Service came to our building weeks in advance for preparation. They did a background check on me and everyone who worked there to make sure none of us were a bunch of weirdos. The Secret Service entirely blocked off access to multiple blocks in Midtown New York City. They even parked a row of garbage trucks from the city all around the building to prevent vehicle-borne IEDs from driving into or slamming through the perimeter checkpoints. They spared no expense. did multiple bomb sweeps in advance and checked to ensure the building was empty the night before. This is called a sterilizing operation, where they do these kind of clean sweeps. Agents were thorough and detailed. However, it's possible that the former president was not granted the same size security service for his detail or security funding. My understanding is that former President Trump would have had an increased security detail available to him as soon as he officially became the Republican nominee this week. Information is still coming out, and we still have a lot to learn in the coming days and weeks, but normally those buildings, especially ones that are that close in proximity, would have had access restricted, which is why this eyewitness account is all the more concerning.
We noticed a guy crawling, bear crawling up the roof of the building beside us, 50 feet away from us. So we're standing there, we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle.
A rifle.
We could clearly see him with a rifle. Absolutely.
There were thousands of people at this event, though, and this early testimony is still being verified. The House Oversight Committee has already called on Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle to testify to Congress about what went wrong.
Is this a failure of security?
Really, at this point, we're not going to make that assessment. Things need to occur investigatively to make those determinations of what, if any, failures there were.
The Department of Homeland Security, in their 2024 assessment, identified several rising threats inside America this year, including foreign and domestic terrorism and political extremism. The report states over the past year, both domestic violent extremists and homegrown violent extremists, inspired by foreign terrorist organizations, have engaged in violence in reaction to social political events, motivated by a mix of conspiracy theories, personalized grievances, and enduring racial, ethnic, religious, and anti-government ideologies often shared online. At first, I was shocked that this even happened in our country. It would be the first time a U.S. president or presidential candidate was injured in an attempted assassination since President Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981. But maybe I shouldn't have been that surprised. According to this New York Times nationwide poll, 10% of those surveyed said that the use of force is justified to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president. A third of those gave that answer also said they owned guns. That's why the next major question will be, what was the shooter's motive? There are many different potential motivations, as we've already seen them play out around the world in recent assassination attempts. The United States Intelligence Agency recently helped foil a Russian plot to assassinate the CEO of German company Rheinmetall that's providing artillery and vehicles used against Russia. There was also an assassination attempt against the Slovak prime minister for political purposes. The FBI, who's heading up the investigation, released information that the shooter's a 20-year-old white male from Pennsylvania. I'm not going to say his name publicly on this platform because I don't want to give air or notoriety to an individual like that. But finding out the motive for law enforcement officials will be an important step to making sure there aren't additional threats. If it does turn out to be politically motivated, it could be a disgruntled Republican or Democrat, which would have an impact on where this goes from here. I definitely should not have been that shocked after seeing things like this New York City theatrical group, Shakespeare in the Park, doing a rendition of President Trump getting stabbed to death in modern-day version of Julius Caesar while he was in office. It wouldn't even be the first politically motivated assassination attempt on Trump. In 2016, someone tried to pull a Secret Service agent's service pistol on Trump, but he was stopped and arrested. This is disturbing to me, and I kind of needed to get this off my chest. I needed to say something about this so that I feel like it's not just bottled up inside, and I think some other people hopefully can understand where I'm coming from. This is not a politically motivated video. I hope I provided some valuable information or insight. Be sure to follow Tim McMillan on Twitter. He's an expert. He's the guy to go to on this topic.
Good morning, America. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
That's a little bit old, that charge.
The chaotic scene minutes into Donald Trump's campaign rally speech in Pennsylvania.
Take a look at what happened.
Secret Service racing to shield the former president as shots rang out. Trump rushed to the hospital. One person killed, 2 others critically injured.
Authorities identify the shooter overnight. This morning,
what we know about the 20-year-old armed with an AR-15 style rifle after his home was searched. Was he a lone wolf gunman? Witnesses described the terrifying scene of bystanders shot right in front of their eyes.
I knew there was no way that he was going to survive that.
President Biden's message to the nation denouncing the shooting.
There's no place in America for this kind of violence. It's sick.
This morning, our interview with the Senate candidate who was sitting in the front row when the former president was shot, Dave McCormick, joins us live. And right now, the heightened threat, the latest on the FBI's involvement in the Secret Service's investigation. With the Republican National Convention about to get underway, the growing questions about security.
This morning, full team coverage on this special edition of Good Morning America.
From ABC News, live in New York, this is Good Morning America.
Good morning, America. It is a morning so many warned would come. An assassination attempt on a former president, a candidate for president, in a toxic and dangerous political environment. After the shooting and treatment in a hospital, Donald Trump arrived back in New Jersey late last night.
So here's what we know right now as we take you through the events. At approximately 6:15 p.m. last night, shortly into former President Trump's appearance at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, gunfire erupted. Trump said he was, quote, shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of his right ear and felt the bullet ripping through. He was taken to a local hospital. President Biden was briefed on the situation, and the White House confirmed the president spoke
live on stream.
with Trump by
We got
phone.
another.
This video shows what is believed to be the suspected gunman. And overnight, the shooter was identified. The Secret Service says the 20-year-old was armed with an AR-15 style rifle on the roof of a building under 200 yards from the podium outside the event's security perimeter and was shot and killed by Secret Service agents. Senate candidate Dave McCormick was steps away from Trump at the moment of the shooting. He'll be joining us live just ahead.
We have team coverage this morning from Pennsylvania, Washington, New Jersey, and Milwaukee, where the Republican
moment, it's more important than ever that we stand united and show our true character as Americans. President Biden addressing the nation, calling for unity.
It's one of the reasons why we have to unite this country. We cannot allow for this to be happening. We cannot be like this. We cannot condone this.
The White House later confirming that Biden and Trump spoke by phone, though not releasing details of the conversation. Last night's rally was slated as the last before Trump heads to Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention, where he's set to accept his third Republican nomination for president and announce his pick for vice president. All three potentials, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, reacting to last night's attack, as well as House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, who was shot and wounded in an attack at a congressional baseball practice back in 2017.
It's alarming to think we came this close to not having him with us. Thank God that he's okay.
In a post on social media, Trump also thanking the Secret Service for their quick actions responding to what happened just last night. In an internal memo obtained by ABC News, the Trump campaign is telling its staff to avoid its offices in Washington, D.C. and West Palm Beach, and also telling them to avoid commenting on what occurred publicly, saying they will not tolerate dangerous rhetoric, George.
And Rachel, you were there on the scene last night. It must have been a surreal and quite scary experience.
Yes, George, and to be honest with you, it's something that we are all still processing. You know, I have been to almost every single campaign rally that the former president has had this election cycle. And these are events that are typically filled with excitement of Trump supporters waiting in line for hours, waiting to see the former president. That rally, once it started, was then over within minutes. We were on the press riser, just about 100 feet away from Donald Trump as that gunfire erupted. We ourselves ducked for cover. We watched as people started shouting and yelling and screaming just in fear and terror, confused by what happened. And typically, these events are extremely safe, George. You go through metal detectors, your bags are screened. It is almost unthinkable like something like this would happen at an event with the former president, but it certainly did just last night. And I will just say, George, there was a sense of grief and sadness from everyone just leaving that rally last night. Most people just could not even believe that this occurred just hours ago, George.
And of course, everyone thinking of the attendee who was killed and the others who were seriously injured. Rachel Scott, thanks very much. Let's get more on the investigation now from our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre, FBI, Secret Service, ATF, all involved. Where do things stand?
Well, the FBI is taking the lead on what they're calling an attempted assassination. A detailed investigation is underway into the suspect's background, looking for any information about the suspect and whether he had any support. They also want to know if anyone knew about this before it happened. And George, given the highly volatile threat environment, they can't take any chances. The early evidence is pointing to this being a lone wolf situation. A trace is being done on the assault rifle to determine when it was purchased and who bought it. And as far as the Secret Service, they will be doing a post-mortem on exactly what went wrong here. I'm told they will be looking into whether or not there's a need to push out further the security perimeters for events like this. And George, we should point out that the state police in Pennsylvania will take the lead on investigating the murder of the spectator and the 2 other men who were wounded in the crowd.
So far, they think this was a lone wolf. What more do we know about the shooter?
Well, so far, no ties to international terrorism have been uncovered, but authorities continue to look to see if there are any connections to domestic extremists, and they're searching to see if the shooter had any social media presence, and if so, whether there were any indications of violence or extremism. We're told he's a registered Republican, and as of yet, there's no signs of an extensive criminal background, but the question is why? Why did he do this, George?
Anything popped up on social media yet?
Not so far that we're seeing. Law enforcement, we expect that we'll get another briefing today, I'm told by FBI officials, to look for some additional guidance about what they know about the suspect.
Pierre, you've been doing this an awful long time, and we all are familiar with presidential security. Usually, during any kind of a presidential event, you have all of the rooftops scoured for anything within range. How could this have possibly happened?
George, that's precisely the key issue. I'm told initially nothing was seen on the roof, but clearly a location that close should have been secured. We're told that after the shots were fired, Secret Service snipers were immediately able to pinpoint the location of the shooter and kill him. But the question is why? Why was he able to get on that roof, George?
Okay, Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. Let's go to the White House now. Our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. And Mary, we saw President Biden upend his weekend plans as well, going from Rehoboth, Delaware, back to the White House.
George, the president racing back here late last night, shortly after he came before those cameras and forcefully condemned this attack. The president saying that there is simply no place in this country for this kind of political violence. He says it's sick, and he is calling for the country to unite in this moment. He's trying to dial down the political temperature during what we know is already an incredibly divisive time in this country. He did reach out to Donald Trump directly, the 2 of them speaking by phone late last night. It is, of course, incredibly rare for the 2 of them to speak. The White House is not, though, offering any details of their conversation. But of course, the president earlier in the night did say he is grateful that Donald Trump is doing well and said he was praying for him and the other victims, George.
Campaign was already in turmoil. What do we know about how the campaign is reacting right now?
Well, right now they are hitting the pause button. For now, they are trying to put politics aside. They are stopping their political communication, pulling their ads off of the airwaves. It is unclear right now, though, George, if the president will cancel or change any of his upcoming campaign travel plans. Also, right now, of course, this does come as the future of the president's candidacy is still very much being called into question. The Democratic Party still in turmoil. It remains to be seen how this incident, this assassination attempt, will impact any of that. For now, the president is continuing to respond as the president first and not a candidate. He is back here at the White House this morning. He is again being briefed by his Homeland Security team and law enforcement official, George.
Mary Bruce, thanks. Let's go to our chief Washington correspondent, John Carl, in Milwaukee for the Republican convention. We heard from President Biden last night. He spoke with Donald Trump. We've also heard from the former presidents.
The former presidents, all of them, President Obama, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, all put out statements strikingly similar, condemning what happened, saying there is no place in our politics for violence and calling for the rhetoric to be turned down. And George, that is a message that we are hearing not just from the former president, but from the congressional leaders in both parties. We saw statements from Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, from Speaker of the House Johnson, from Mitch McConnell, and quite notably from a former Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, who has experience in the impact on violence. Obviously, her husband, Paul, less than 2 years ago, was attacked inside their home in San Francisco by a crazed individual wielding a hammer and suffered serious injuries. So she was also saying this has no place in our politics. We must condemn it and make it clear no violence and turn down the rhetoric.
How did this all play out at the convention site last night?
Well, I have to tell you, I was on the floor of the convention when I heard what had happened. I was actually speaking with the RNC chairman, Michael Whatley, right steps away from here. I went up to him and told him what I had just learned. And as I was doing that, an aide came to him with a phone and rushed him right off the floor. There was a sense that everything had changed almost immediately. I mean, there is an intense security posture here, obviously already. My sense it's even further intensified. And Reince Priebus, who we'll be talking to later in the show, is the chair of the host committee here. He's actually spoken to President Trump this morning. President Trump reaching out to say that this convention has to go forward and absolutely not be scaled back. We'll be talking to Reince about what else the former president had to say about what happened yesterday in Pennsylvania.
And it's going forward with the Republican Party now galvanized.
Oh, George, galvanized, absolutely. That image of the former president, blood dripping down his face, his arm raised, that image is now the symbol of this campaign, of this convention, perhaps a defining image for Trump supporters, of Trump himself. This convention will go forward in a highly energized fashion. As one person involved in it said, we are going forward with a vengeance.
Okay, John Carl, thanks. Let's bring in our Chief Global Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz. And Martha, I know you've traveled around the country talking to voters in our deeply divided nation right now. In some ways, this is a horrific symptom of the underlying division in this country.
It certainly is, George, and I'm sure that will probably continue. We saw President Trump raise his right hand, as John just described, and we've seen those pictures. But we could also see him say what I believe was fight, fight. That was his first instinct. And this is a country divided. This is a country, we saw the violence yesterday, the horrific violence yesterday. And we've seen it in places. And we've also seen this morning, we've heard President Trump say he wants the country to come together, to be united. But others are directly pointing the finger at President Biden with, of course, no evidence that he incited this or had anything to do with this assassination attempt. We heard J.D. Vance, Senator J.D. Vance, who is one of the leading picks for vice president, in a tweet say, this is not just some isolated incident. The central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs. That rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination. Again, there is no evidence of that. We do not know the motive of that shooter at this point. And others also, Vivek Ramaswamy saying President Biden's ritual condemnation of political violence are insufficient. No amount of verbiage today changes the toxic national climate that led to this tragedy, saying that Trump's safety is nothing short of an act of God. And I think you'll see a lot of supporters thinking the same thing. And also, George, we have to point out, no matter who the shooter, what the shooter's motives were, no matter who the shooter is, you are going to hear conspiracy theories going forward.
No question about that. But as you point out those statements from J.D. Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy, of course, President Trump and his supporters have contributed to this violent rhetoric as well.
Well, absolutely, George. We were just looking back this morning at some of the things that former President Trump has said. He warned last March of potential death and
they just tried to kill Donald Trump on live TV.
District Attorney. Our country is being destroyed.
Oh shit, Chad! Look,
peaceful. Trump just warned of bedlam in the country if the criminal charges against him succeeded, and of course, in March. He said, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That will be the least of it. He said he was partly joking and that was taken out of context. But those are indeed his words. And you have heard it from supporters as well. And supporters are certainly in some parts angry. And let's remember January 6th. In so many ways for the campaign, January 6th will probably be in the background after yesterday's event. This is a very difficult time for this campaign. I'm sure this week in Milwaukee that President Trump will highlight this, and President Biden is going to have to figure out how to go forward with this campaign and what exactly they say.
Martha Raddatz, thanks very much. Let's bring in John Cohen now, former counterterrorism official in the government, worked at the Department of Homeland Security. And John, thank you for joining us this morning. We've talked so much over the recent years about this threat environment. You've been sounding the alarm bell.
Yeah, George, I mean, I have been working for the last year with law enforcement and election officials across the country, so we can be better prepared as a nation to deal with the current threat environment. And quite frankly, what I will tell you what I've been saying to them. This is the most complex, dynamic, and dangerous threat environment that I've experienced in the 40 years that I've been working in law enforcement and Homeland Security. The reason I make that assessment is in part because of what we've been hearing so far on this show. We are an angry, divided nation, and that anger and division has become intertwined in our political discourse. There are a growing number of people in this country who believe that violence is an appropriate way to express their ideological or political views or to express their disagreement with others. And we are experiencing sustained levels of violence in this country fueled by a media and online ecosystem that's saturated with, as Martha said, conspiracy theories and other content that's purposely placed there by groups and individuals here and abroad seeking to inspire illegal and even violent activity.
What kind of threats are you seeing course through the system every day?
We're seeing calls for acts of violence directed at election officials, at elected officials, at government officials, at law enforcement, and at political candidates. We are seeing people in government being doxxed. We're seeing government offices being swatted, which means false 911 calls are being placed so that police will respond in an emergency crisis mode. We're seeing cyber attacks directed at government and non-government officials. We're seeing targeted acts of violence and destructive activity being directed at parts of our community who are targeted because of their faith, their political beliefs, their immigration status, their gender identity. These are the These are the issues that law enforcement is having to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
And in your view, what's the most important thing that can be done right now to combat it?
Well, I think, unfortunately, two things we're going to need to do. One, we are going to have to dramatically expand the intelligence sharing and the reaction to intelligence by law enforcement. There are going to be a lot of questions about whether there was, as Pierre pointed out, whether there was any type of forewarning of this attack. We need to look at intelligence differently. Secondly, we need to lower the temperature of our political rhetoric. Part of the danger here is that the voices of extremism have become intermingled with mainstream political and media figures who often they both mimic the same language, and that adds to the volatility of the threat environment.
John Cohen, thanks very much. Up next, the Senate candidate who was in the front row at Donald Trump's rally. We're going to speak with him.
I was in the front row, and President Trump had just announced me and said he was going to have me come up on the stage, and said, well, wait a minute. And then there were a number of shots, I think probably 7 or 8 shots.
That was Pennsylvania Republican Senate nominee Dave McCormick, who's sitting behind Donald Trump at the rally yesterday. He joins us now. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. McCormick. Just expand on what you were just saying from last night's special. What did you see happen? What did you hear? When did you realize what was going on?
Well, as I said, I was sitting right in the front row, and the shots went off, and it was pretty clear quickly. It was a huge rally. It was lots of upbeat energy, and it was pretty clear quickly this was a series of shots, and the president went down immediately, and the Secret Service jumped on top of him, and then he got up, and you saw the pictures you're now seeing on TV where his fist came out, and in sort of a measure of, I think, defiance and reassurance and leadership, he really reassured people that he was okay. But at the same time, over my shoulder, it became clear that someone else had been hit, and sadly, an innocent bystander was knocked over, and it was clear that he was very, very injured and bleeding very badly. And so there were sort of two things going on at the same time, one to my left and one to my right. And the president was taken off the stage, and there was a real confusion of what was going on, whether there were multiple shooters, whether the shooting was done, and really a sad day. The president, an inch difference and the president would have been dead. It was a very scary moment.
You've been out campaigning for months. How have you experienced this toxic environment that we were just talking about with John Cohen, the counterterrorism specialist?
I mostly haven't, to be honest with you. Obviously, we have two very conflicting visions of where to take the country, the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party, and President Biden versus President Trump. And so there's a real conflict of ideas. But for the most part, I don't hear extreme rhetoric. And obviously, extreme rhetoric has no place in politics. And, as a father of 6 daughters, it's scary. I spent my night talking to my daughters and reassuring them that their dad's going to be okay, even though he's decided to try to run for public office and serve his country. So this is something that's unacceptable in political life. And it's unacceptable wherever it comes from, and so we have to push back on it. And certainly, it's not hard to imagine that some of the extreme rhetoric we see contributed to the attempt on President Trump and, Steve Scalise and some of these other horrible tragedies that happened, Paul Pelosi. This is unacceptable in American political life, and we need to come together and agree on that.
Yeah, and that your message is being echoed. It was echoed by Speaker Johnson this morning. It was echoed by President Biden. Former President Trump said we have to come together as well. But we've also seen that several top Republicans are also seeking to blame Democrats for this. How do we take the temperature down right now?
Well, I think we first of all have to recognize that we do have a real conflict of ideas. That's okay. Our country is faced with very significant choices, and running for office, I believe that we're going in the wrong direction. And so I'm making the case as aggressively as I can that we need to go in a different direction. That's different than attacking people. That's different than breaking down people. That's different than threatening violence. And so we need to embrace conflict of ideas, conflict in the direction of our country that needs to be addressed at the ballot box. But we don't need to resort and can't resort to violence as a way of promoting political agendas. And I think that certainly the environment contributed, I think, to these acts of violence that we're seeing, not just last night, but others. And it needs to be dialed back across the board.
Dave McCormick, thanks for your time this morning. Up next, we speak with a retired Secret Service agent who served 3 presidents. Stay with us.
There's nothing specific and nothing credible out there right now, but we are tracking all threat streams, and we certainly work with our partners at the FBI and other intelligence agencies that supply that information to us. I think that the environment that we're dealing with today is certainly different than it was 4 years ago. I'm sure we'll see an evolution in the next 4 years as well, but it is definitely something that we take into consideration.
Secret Service Director Kim Cheadle last Sunday, joined now by former Secret Service Special Agent Paul Eckloff, who serves on the protective detail for 3 presidents. Paul, thank you for joining us this morning. I want to ask you the question I asked Pierre Thomas earlier in the program. Hard to believe that someone could get on a rooftop that close to a presidential rally.
Well, sir, when you look at the campaign events, they're designed far differently than presidential protection. Many people are saying this was an attempt on President Trump, realizing that it is former President Trump. They are afforded less protection than sitting presidents by authorization, and campaign events are designed for access and viewing of Mr. Trump, rather than security. The Secret Service does an exemplary job in advancing these sites. The unfortunate reality is they exist as we know them today because
that nigga died in Yo, what are you gonna do?
America.
Like, you can't upgrade that.
Response
Yeah, so it was like
so
essentially he said that
and what we saw yesterday,
Dollar
you
basically
dissect the tape, was a textbook response. I think it's important for people to understand when you see that counter sniper technician take out the threat. That until he identified it as a threat.
Oh, let me tell you how this
from 200 yards.
Yeah, so Kodak Absol. I always thought she was a good
If he had neutralized that threat,
Lil Baby has dropped about 45 Safaris. He's dropped a double album where marry her, and he's really trying to find
we'd be having a very different
you got a new snippet.
He had a very difficult job. Identified the threat and neutralized it within a second. And the agents willingly moved onto the stage, shielding former President Trump with their own bodies. I think that people need to realize, and Americans don't realize, it's a very unique situation for the Secret Service, as I experienced as well. Secret Service agents wear body armor, but it is not to protect their own lives. It is to shield the protectee with their own bodies, their own flesh, and to ensure that any further attempts do not go through them and hit the protectee.
And it's a reminder, there's just no such thing as perfect security.
Absolutely. It is a matter of risk assessment, risk tolerance. It is a constant back and forth between the Secret Service and the campaign detail who decides where and when these events occur and how they are secured. Until that individual identified himself as a threat, nothing could be done. Now, there will be a time to dissect and look at the security plan, but with the Republican convention as a national special security event, far more security will be in place. And when I watched those friends of mine and my former colleagues stormed the stage going toward gunfire, shielding, covering, and evacuating the former president, it gave me a realization that their mettle was tested and they passed that. Secret Service does advances in the White House, throughout the world, on the streets of war zones. And yesterday it happened to be on a field in Pennsylvania when they shielded, covered, and evacuated. And today, President Trump is alive because of the brave men and women of the Secret Service.
There is just no question that they were absolutely heroic in the immediate aftermath of that shooting. And you hit on something else important there that I think you should explain to people, because I remember from my time in campaigns in the White House as well, there actually is an ongoing dialogue between the Secret Service and the candidates, and there's always a back and forth over how approachable the candidate wants to be and what the Secret Service needs to do for protection.
That's absolutely true. There are constant conversations. It reminds me, I was the lead advance agent for President Obama's train stop in Baltimore on the way for his inauguration in Washington, D.C. It was a historic time for America. I remember very early talking to the campaign staff, and they were very relieved that he was going to be in Memorial Park in front of 40,000 people in the center of Baltimore. And when we were doing the advance, they said, well, it'll be great, because in the campaign, we put the magnetometer 75 yards away. And I looked at them and I said, well, welcome to the White House. I will have the magnetometers 3 blocks away, and I will be shutting down the entire city center. There's an entirely different stance, protective advance, and assets put in place for sitting presidents versus campaign stops. And that is a constant give and take. The Secret Service would love nothing more than if the president stayed in the White House and stayed behind a secure perimeter. That's simply not the reality of politics or the American democracy. The people demand and should expect access to the people that represent them.
Paul Eckloff, thanks for your insight and your time. Thanks very much. Roundtable's up next. We'll be right back.
Look, there's no place in America for this kind of violence. It's sick. It's sick. It's one of the reasons why we have to unite this country. We cannot allow for this to be happening. We cannot be like this. We cannot condone this. The idea that there's political violence or violence in America like this is just unheard of. It's just not appropriate. And everybody must condemn it. Everybody. I'll keep you informed, and if I am able to speak to Donald, I'll let you know that as well.
That was President Biden last night. He eventually did speak with former President Trump, although neither the White House nor the Trump campaign has said anything about what was said in that conversation. I'm joined here on the floor of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee by former RNC chair and current chair of the host committee here, Reince Priebus, former DNC chair Donna Brazile, and Politico Playbook co-author Rachel Bade. So, Reince, I want to get right to your conversation. You just spoke with former President Trump. What did he have to say?
Well, I mean, he was grateful. I think that he was grateful for the miracle of what happened, at least in his case, but he was also sad.
Grateful, you mean a miracle that he...
I mean, 1/4 inch turned the other direction, and we're obviously talking about something very different this morning. And
that's the way he saw it. He
Totally. And he also expressed, he was sad about, obviously, the person who had died, who just, he said, you know, he was just sitting there, and now he's gone. And, you know, and I just think that all of those emotions all coming together at
on
once.
live TV.
He talked about, you know, it felt
chat.
like a knife
Oh
went through
shit,
his
chat.
ear,
Look.
and then realized very
Shit
quickly
just got real, chat.
what was
Something
happening.
that said,
But
take a
I
look
think
at what happened.
How he's now.
Well, I would say he's unwavering. But
Donald Trump just...
Oh, strong. I mean, very strong this morning. I mean, he sounds like a person who is ready to go, very strong, unwavering. One of the reasons I was talking to him is because I'm the chair of the host committee in Milwaukee.
Live on stream.
You know,
we got
I
another.
would leave things alone, but
breaking
he wants
news
to move
when you
forward.
least expect.
He was very clear to me, at least for the host committee events, that no, we need to keep moving forward. So
this convention goes forward. It's not going to be scaled back.
No, in fact, if you had to ask me, I would say this convention is going to be epic, and we have a president.
They just tried to kill Donald Trump on live TV
yesterday, and we had loss of life, and hopefully no more.
Oh shit, chat! Look,
but he is ready to go, and I think the unwavering attitude that he is bringing now to Milwaukee is going to even further energize this crowd. Certainly reflective.
ITV,
in
live
tragedy,
on stream.
God is our refuge,
We got
and I
enough.
think most people feel that way today.
Breaking news
but
when you
we also,
least
as Americans,
expect it.
have to
They
come
just
out
tried
of
to
this
kill
and
Donald.
move forward. And there'll be time to reflect. There'll be time to investigate. There'll be time for politics. But today wasn't a day for that, and that certainly wasn't anything the president was talking about. It was just sort of just grateful, unwavering, move forward.
Okay, and we have the two of you here, both former party chairman, know what it's like to run a convention under extraordinary circumstances. Donna, what was your reaction when you first heard what happened? You saw those shots, you saw the president go down.
Well, first of all, this is my 5th Republican convention. I know that sounds strange as a Democrat, but I am always grateful that I'm able to participate in these moments, to learn from the party, to learn how they're putting together their operation. And I was talking with Ann Hathaway, your colleague, also Mr. Watley, the chairman of the campaign, of the party. I was meeting the interns, you know, getting in the spirit. And so when I heard, it was just sombering. I mean, sombering. I'm an American. I mean, acts of violence is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And so my first reaction was one of prayer because I'm a Christian. It was one of thinking about the people at the rally, thinking about the former president, thinking about his family, thinking about the Secret Service men. I mean, I've been a part of the American political process for more than half of my life, and indeed most of my life. And so it's a sombering moment. It's a moment of reflection. It's a moment of reflecting on what we say, how we say it, and what we do. And I'm thinking about the delegates who will be occupying this space over the next 4 days. They're the people that I want to say, come, enjoy yourself, enjoy this moment, enjoy the great barbecue I had. But more importantly, to come and celebrate what we do as American citizens. And yes, the political culture is toxic. There's more rhetoric than meets the mind from both sides, but cooler minds will prevail. I am grateful that President Biden went out last night. He reached out to former President Trump. The statements from former Presidents Clinton, Obama, and the Carter Center. This is a moment. Bush. And George W. Bush. This is a moment. It's a moment for our country to take a deep breath about who we are. The reflection, the words that have come from all over this planet. We're Americans, and the culture of violence, the political rhetoric, we have to end it.
Ryan, sir, and this is really to both of you, but have you heard anything about that phone call? I mean,
no, I have not. But one of the things I'm going to say is people should know there's a lot of mutual respect among party leaders. I I mean, there's a lot of things that we have in common, the things that we do, the delegates, the idea that members of our party actually choose our nominee, and there's a process, and that's what this is. You know, it's just sad that when people don't care about their own life, and they don't care about someone else's life, I mean, we've obviously got a problem that somehow or another we've got to address.
And I want to play the reaction that we heard this morning from the Speaker of the House, from Mike Johnson, talking about the need to turn down the rhetoric. Take a listen. This is Mike Johnson.
We can have heated political discourse and debates, but it shouldn't be personal, and we shouldn't be targeting people. I mean, look, President Biden himself said in recent days it's time to put a bullseye on Trump. I mean, I know that he didn't mean what is being implied there, but that kind of language on either side should be called out, and we have to make clear that this is part of our system. We can have vigorous debate, but it needs to end there.
That was Speaker Johnson on the Today Show. Rachel, what are you've been monitoring all the reaction.
Oh yeah, this was supposed to be a Starfield stream. Yeah, so I really do got to start over.
We begin this morning with our breaking news. Former President Donald Trump is safe, and a 20-year-old shooter is dead after a shocking assassination attempt on the former president in Pennsylvania.